What I'll do is I'll call you. I'll call you up at the time, right? Okay. So let's start this session. I think it's going to be a bit shorter than initially planned because I believe there's some voting going on right now. And so that we cannot compete with voting. So, but this session builds on the session that we have just concluded, which was the future of resilience, and focusing on this session will focus more on the role of local governments, cities, municipalities, towns in increasing resilience, especially to disaster risk. So let me start with a little bit of background, and then we have a few key discussants whom I will call to the stage. But let me first start with the background. If we can have the PowerPoint, please. I think all of you know the Making Cities Resilient campaign. This was a campaign which was launched in 2010 with 9 mayors at that time, led by the mayor of Bonn, and the whole idea was to create awareness amongst cities on the need to reduce disaster risk as a development objective. So initially the campaign started with 9 mayors led by the mayor of Bonn with as an advocacy campaign to convince more and more mayors around the world that this is something that they need to look at, not as a cost but as an investment to reduce disaster risk. Now, what happened over the years, today we have 4,300 plus mayors signed up to the Making Cities Resilient campaign. So it is, of course, grown over the last 9 years. Now, basically it has been always a partnership. It is a global campaign, but working with a large number of partners, including, for example, UCLG, ICLEI, World Bank, private sector companies, IBM, AECOM, and so on. So it's quite a large partnership, and has been developing tools. Simple, easy to use tools such as the Disaster Resilience Scorecard, which was developed by IBM and AECOM, and then peer reviewed by the partners, and was utilized by the campaign cities to develop the disaster risk reduction strategies. The campaign ends in 2020. So what we have been doing, we were looking at what were the impacts of the campaign and whether the campaign has achieved what it was supposed to achieve, or is there some need for continuing this activity. 200 cities have been working on developing this, using the scorecard to assess their level of resilience from disasters and create a baseline so that they know where they are, where they want to be by 2030, and they can understand what actions they need to take to do that. A number of cities are already developing the DRR strategies, and we conducted a number of studies and found that the cities, and this has also come from our partners, that the cities who have been part of the campaign have found it easier to initiate actions for resilience than cities which have not been part of the campaign. So with this kind of information, we went into a process of consultation with cities, with key partners like ICLEI, UCLG, World Bank, and so on, to find out, have we done enough? Should we stop and let the natural momentum take care of things? or is there need to continue? If to continue, is there need to change direction? Is there new topics that should be added to the discussion? So overwhelmingly, over the past 1 year, what we have heard from the cities and the key partners is that this work needs to continue, and it needs to be two-pronged. So advocacy needs to continue because there are still so many cities and local governments who are not yet aware of what they can do for reducing the disaster risk and increasing the resilience. But at the same time, there is need to provide more and more access to technical support, to access to finance, and so on, so that cities can be in a better position to implement the actions that will help them to increase their resilience. So apart from that, we also ask the cities, so what are the key areas which you find need to be further strengthened, or new areas? So as I mentioned, advocacy continues there, but if you see the other topics, these are all areas of specific technical support that cities are asking for, and including the integration with the climate agenda, the financing for the climate, the link between the national and the city, which was discussed just in the earlier session on resilience, the legal frameworks, and so on. So these are the key areas where the new iteration, the successor of the campaign, is going to focus on. And the focus is not only on the policy part of it, but on the actual nuts and bolts, how to make your infrastructure resilient. So for example, just in the last session, we had the mayor of Bilbao talking about how they have improved the infrastructure to manage water, for example. So what we are looking at now, and this is something which all the partners have agreed. For example, UCLG, ICLEI, and so on are all on the steering committee of the Making Cities Resilient campaign. Something that has to be launched next year in 2020, and to focus from 2020 to 2030, so that it can be co-terminus with the Sendai framework, the Paris Agreement, the SDG 2030 agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the New Urban Agenda. So everything works together. Looking at a grand partnership focused on implementation of the emerging themes. The emerging themes are what I just showed earlier. So a grand partnership meaning two levels. We have what we call the global partners, so UCLG, ICLEI, World Bank, UN Habitat, and others. These are all our global partners. But also looking at partners who are at the regional level, at the national level, and at the local level. So in that, one aspect is the global partners have their local networks. So for example, UCLG and ICLEI have the local municipal networks at the national level or at the regional level. So how can we tap that to scale up this activity on reducing disaster risk? So scaling up through the networks of local associations. So not just the global partnership, but also looking at the ground level partnership. Then how can we bring about incentives for city-to-city learning? So this was one issue which all the cities said that they learn the best when they hear another city, because they have similar challenges, similar constraints, and how is another city handling it? That's the best learning mechanism. So, so we are looking at promoting certain cities as resilience hubs. So that's something to think about. And that would be cities who are proud of what they've done. They are willing to share those examples, and they would like to create a mechanism of city-to-city exchange or a platform, a knowledge platform to share the experiences. So not just their own experiences, but within the region, the other cities also, how they can share their experiences. Then support at the global level, of course, like the current campaign, but also at the regional level. And here regional, we mean the above the national, so not the national, regional, local, but the above the national level. So having some regional coordination mechanisms which can help. And the idea is that everything at the global is too difficult to handle, needs to go down. And maybe even at the national level. So links with the national and the local. Because as we discussed in the last panel also, there's a lot of policy frameworks, legislative frameworks which are developed at the national level, but they need to empower the local, and they need to facilitate the work with the local, and the two need to talk to each other. So this vertical integration. And another important point was, of course, to integrate climate action into the urban development work. So, for example, you might have heard Sendai framework says target E, which is development of national and local DRR strategies. So, but the concept of the target E is not that there should be a separate DRR strategy, but that DRR strategy should be integrated into the urban development plan. So what it means is that if the city is going to construct a bridge, they are going to make an investment which they want to last for 100 years. So is a risk assessment being done for that bridge? And if the risk assessment is done, the risk factors are mitigated, then we have a resilient bridge. So integrating in that manner, or it could be other softer components like community education or community involvement in resilience, in the decision making, and so on. So these are some of the issues, or rather the proposals that we have on the table, and we are looking at designing a new successor of the campaign. So we were using this opportunity to just share with you some of these simple points to start with. And then we have some key discussants with us who can share their views from their viewpoint of their organizations. And to start this debate, I would like to welcome Mr. Gino van Beggen, the Secretary General of ICLEI, to come and share his views on this point, please. Do you
want me to sit here alone?
No, I want you to. Yeah, you can sit and speak, and then I will be off.
But maybe we can also ask the other discussants to come up.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's
it's
nicer.
Okay. I was going to call one by one. Okay. So and then we have Nan from the United Nations Capital Development Fund, and Jane Katz from Habitat for Humanity International. Jane, can you come up?
Sure.
Okay. So, Gino, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and welcome to my panelists. Otherwise, I feel a bit lonely here on the stage. So you're asking me to respond to the initiative that is taken on by UNDRR, and in particularly with regard to the future after the 2020 year. Let me just start by saying, with regard to our experiences, and I should also say my name is Gino van Begen. I'm the Secretary General of ICLEI, Local Governance for Sustainability, and we work with around 1,700 cities around the world, in particularly via programs and projects to help them to increase the sustainability of their urban areas. And when we talk about sustainability, we look on that from 5 different angles. We feel that if we talk about sustainable development, development is the first thing that is important. There are huge differences on a planetary scale in terms of development. So we feel it's important to have a development and enhance the development, but it must be done in a sustainable way. So what would that mean? For us, it means that development must be, first of all, based on low emissions. So that's one of the key issues, and this comes back also with the climate impacts that our moderator, also reported on. And obviously, this is impacting the disasters that we will be facing in the future. So low emission development is the very first part. Secondly, a resilient development. And I think I will elaborate a little bit more on that in a moment. But that is what we feel. We need to prepare ourselves, and cities, urban areas need to prepare themselves, because there's a rapid urbanization going on at the one hand. Meaning also there are more people coming to cities or urban areas, all in need of food, energy, jobs, culture, education, economy. That makes those urban areas interesting, but at the same time also at risk, and in particular at risk to disasters or climate impacts, and not only climate impacts, I should say, but many other impacts that I'm happy to elaborate on in a moment. So resilient development is a second pillar for us in terms of achieving sustainability or sustainable development. The third pillar is a circular development, and I think this is also linked to what we are discussing here today. Trying to achieve a development where we have far more less dependency on resources, where we recycle our resources, where we look into ways of reusing what we have used as well, and not just spend more on the resourcing. Thirdly, and I think that is also a point that we need to look into here when it comes to DRR, is using our nature in a better way. So it's a relationship with nature. Nature gives a lot to us, and we are talking about biodiversity. We all know, and many of our scientists are reminding us of the enormous loss of biodiversity, which is a richness that we are losing, because that richness is actually helping us to continue to live, in particular if we would be with far more people, residents, inhabitants, as we are today. So nature-based development, a development that is respectful but also looks into how can we use the potential of nature, is important. And fifthly, of course, for us, sustainable development means that it must be a people-centered development. So people must be at the center of that development, and not cash or capital or money. And I think that's most probably the most difficult part and most difficult piece to address when we are talking about sustainable development at large. Having said that, coming back now to disaster risk prevention and reduction, we from our side, when I think it's 10 years ago, in 2009, when we were preparing for the input of local and regional governments into the discussions on climate change, which were then held in Copenhagen, which then ultimately did not reach to a satisfactory result between the nations. We felt that we cannot only talk about mitigation, but we need to talk about resilience. And we need to talk immediately about how can we prepare ourselves prevent ourselves for any impacts, in this case now, of climate change that is ongoing. We knew in 2009 that we were close to the 1 degrees. We are now at 1.2 degrees, and we will soon be at 1.5. So there is no way for any local leader, any national leader, to deny the fact that climate change is happening, and therefore this will be, impacting our lifestyles, the ways of how we construct and build our buildings, the way of how we are moving ourselves in an urban area, the way of how we produce our food, etc., etc. So resilience is extraordinarily important. And when we started 10 years ago, we had difficulties, and I say this on this floor, we had difficulties to find the experts who could actually talk about resilience at the local level. And I think that's my first point that I wanted to make. It is great that we are now trying to find this ground partnership that you were talking about, because what we see is there is a lack at the local level of knowledge. There is not enough of a scientific base available for local leaders to actually take the decisions that they need to take in a sound manner. And so the partnership, and when you call it ground partnership, as it is on your slide, I think we have to include science here. We have to include the institutions who have the knowledge base to bring us further when we look at it at a local level, in particular when it comes to resilience and in particular when it comes to climate change impacts, because they are very unequally differentiated on the globe. Yes, scaling up through networks of local associations, we are very much in favor of working with all the colleagues here on the stage, because we can be an intermediary for spreading and promoting the ideas of DRR towards the various cities that we are working on. And as I said in the beginning, we are working with more than 1,700 cities. Not all of them are active in that particular space, but I think promoting the idea is definitely helpful. Incentives for city-to-city learning. That is what we have seen in the last 10 years. We have brought together cities from around the world every year in Bonn at our Resilient Cities Congresses. We are now looking towards bringing that format to an elevated level. We want actually to not only have the city-to-city learning, we want to continue that, but we want to link it directly to those organizations that luckily we have a close proximity in Bonn, because Bonn is also the host of the UNFCCC Secretariat, as well as the Desertification and Land Degradation Secretariat. It is the host of the SDG campaign bureau, the NDC partnership, and many others, IPBES, the IPCC for biodiversity. So, yes, city-to-city learning is extraordinarily important, and I would welcome very, very much if UNDRR can look into possibilities from nations to get the resourcing that we can bring this further to the local and regional levels and improve that city-to-city learning. That is the major message that we have received over the last 10 years of those congresses we have done. In the meanwhile, we are organizing what we call reality check sessions, which means that those cities that have already embarked and made first experiences with their resilience action plans, including DRR, explain this to those that are on their path to get there. I think this is when you hear from practitioners that are your peers, it is a richness that is far more different than if you hear this, with all due respect, from engineers or consultants around the world. I very much agree with the next points of your slide. We need that and this is where I'm looking towards UNDRR. You are the organization that has the links to the global community. You are the one that can reach out to all of these other UN agencies. And what we see is that there is a necessity to bring the issues of DRR and resilience into the various agendas. It is not something that at a local level for mayors to say, okay, now you do an SDG plan, now you do a DRR plan, now you do a resilience plan, now you do a climate plan, now you do, so that is just not working. Local leaders need to understand the integrative approach. And they are wanting also to come out to their population and to their citizens, inhabitants and residents to say, this is what we are going to do, and it's one unified approach. They cannot and must not look into what the international community, with all good efforts, is trying to get at, but they need to bring those themes together in the implementation of their local agendas. So, final point, and I'm sorry if I've been long, my final point I want to make is that, yes, I think the grand partnership is essential because it can bring together various initiatives, people thinking, concepts that can complement one another. And so that is what I would hope that UNDRR can help to create a platform for that advancement. But it's very, very clear that currently, when it comes to DRR and resilience, I should say, according to our experiences and what we hear from the cities that we are working with, they are left on their own. I mean, from a resource perspective, they are left on their own. And when I say resource perspective, it's not only financially, it's also capacity building. And so there's too little that is being done at the national level, there's too little that is being done at a global level to transfer all of this at those other levels. We, from our side, pick up some of those pieces, but definitely we cannot do that on our own. So the grand partnership is absolutely necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gino. Very, very good points and very valid points about the grand partnership, especially focusing on helping cities in a more proactive and realistic manner to provide the knowledge, the scientific base, the evidence, and the technical capacities, and also the trying to encourage the financial capacity also to the cities. So, yes, that is the way forward. And I think when we're talking about financial resources, I'd like to introduce Nan Zhang. She is she's working on policy and research at the UN Capital Development Fund. So the UN Capital Development Fund is a global fund which provides municipal finance, especially for urban infrastructure, for climate change adaptation, and so on. So again, a key partner, in fact, a new partner to the Making Cities Resilient campaign, and especially looking at this aspect of access to finance. So, Nan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sanjaya. Yes, I'm from the United Nations Capital Development Fund, also UNCDF. We are a UN agency that's unlocking private and public finance for the poor in the world's 47 least developed countries. So I want to make my points from the financing perspective. I think there are two aspects. One is about financing urban resilience, and the other one is about the synergies between climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So the global urban infrastructure financing gap is massive. Every year it's around $4.1 to $4.7 trillion. And according to the UNDRR's Global Assessment Report 2019, financing for disaster risk reduction is also still very minimal compared to financing post-disaster responses. And also only another study shows that only 8% goes to the investment in disaster risk reduction for resilience. So those are really concerning numbers. And also you often see financing for climate change adaptation and financing for disaster risk reduction. They are two different streams. But in reality, they are so closely linked and sometimes often overlap, especially at the local level. So many disaster risk reduction measures can contribute to a better climate adaptation. And the strategies for climate adaptation will not be achieved without understanding local risks, which are usually in the form of disaster risks. So we should really take advantage of these two angles and create greater and stronger synergies. And one indispensable aspect of this synergy is to build a sustainable, systematic financing mechanism for urban resilience, including both climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction through collaborative partnerships. One example is the UNCDF local climate adapt living facility, also called LOCAL, which provides a standard country-owned mechanism to channel climate finance to local governments in the least developed countries. We focus on local climate adaptation, and we use performance-based climate resilience grants and capacity building support to mainstream climate adaptation into local government's planning and budgeting so that they can trigger more financial flows down to the local level. And one of the key areas of our investment is disaster risk reduction. So currently we have about 9% in our portfolio, and the projects are like early warning systems, upgrade existing or install new infrastructure, mainstream climate change into local disaster management planning, capacity building, etc. And I can give you two examples. One in Nepal. Most of the investments are climate-related disaster prevention. So we have about 27 projects addressing the works on roads, rivers, and canals to prevent flooding and landslides to the downstream and neighboring communities. We also had workshops on the integration of disaster risk management into local climate planning, local government planning. And in Niger, we have started piloting the localized climate risk assessments. And we have financed 41 adaptation investments that are relevant to disaster risk reduction, including like rehabilitating degraded land, water infrastructure, and capacity building, food storage facilities, etc. So that's one aspect. It's about intergovernmental fiscal transfer. And the other aspect, LOCAL is also expected to work more in urban areas with the International Municipal Investment Fund, which was jointly developed by us, UNCDF, and UCLG, and FMDV. And actually here on Tuesday, we announced the selection of the fund manager, Meridiam. And so the IMIF fund is designed to focus exclusively on supporting cities and local governments in developing countries to invest in urban resilience projects. We've also, yes, as Sanjaya mentioned, joined the Making Cities Resilient campaign actually only a couple of weeks ago. And we are very committed to partnering with UNDRR and other partners in this campaign to strengthen the localization of local disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. So to summarize, I think to make cities resilient, 4 elements are vital. One is the key role of local governments. And second is the synergies between climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction. Third is a systematic approach on financing urban resilience. And lastly, collaborative partnerships. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nan, for very interesting introduction to this, firstly to the facility, and this was, as you said, just this week. Yeah, the fund manager has been appointed. It's a collaboration between the UN Capital Development Fund and UCLG, and has been launched in this venue, right? Yeah. So, so that's something to look forward to in the future for all the cities, and I think that's something which cities will be able to learn from and to utilize for their work, and it will be a key contribution, a key resource available to cities through the Making Cities Resilient campaign and its successor in 2020, amongst others. So it's not just about the money, as Gino had also said, but the technical capacity, and that's very important. Cities also need the capacity to understand where they can access finance and how they can access finance and what are the steps they need to take. For example, at this forum, I was listening to the mayor of Johannesburg yesterday talking about how they issued green bonds, and then the very complex process that they went through to be in a position to issue those bonds. But then, as a result, they were able to raise, in the first issue, they were able to raise $10 million. And then what he was mentioning was that they issued those bonds 10 times. So, once the capacity is there, then there are the other options. And then let me go to Jane Katz. She's the Director of International Affairs in Habitat for Humanity International, which is based in Washington, D.C., and focused on the issues of housing, urban development, land, and related issues. So again, as you all know, for climate change adaptation and for reducing disaster risk, the land policies are really, really very critical. And of course directly linked to housing and other issues of urban development. So Jane, the floor is yours.
Sure. I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach because we aren't members of the campaign, and what I did was to go to UNDRR and say, what is this campaign? Can we talk about how we should be a part of it? So I'm coming from a different direction, not having the experience of working on the campaign yet, but to exploring whether we should be partners. Habitat for Humanity is an international non-governmental organization. We're not part of UN Habitat in any way, but we work in many communities around the world, and we are based in about 70 different countries. Our organization is based not in Washington, but in the U.S., in Atlanta, Georgia, but that's okay. I'm in Washington, D.C., working on advocacy and policy issues, but that's fine. We implemented a campaign on access to land for housing close to 4 years ago, and as part of that campaign, we were looking at implementing a global campaign, but that it should be localized. And so we've been working with about 40 different local areas, local authorities in different countries on different aspects of land tenure issues. So the campaign itself had a goal of close to 10 million people that we wanted to reach through changing land policies to be able to build housing. And we focused in on several different areas. One was gender, a cross-cutting issue. We also were looking at how people who live in informal settlements are affected by land tenure issues if they don't have access to the land they're living on. But another aspect is secure tenure itself, making sure that people have the tenure security that they need through different processes and regularization of land issues. And then the fourth was disaster disaster resilience. And so that's been a big piece of what we've been looking at in terms of how we can contribute to advocacy around land issues and disasters. Habitat has been working in the field of disaster risk reduction for many years and disaster response, and we do have many tools that we are talking about. I have a colleague here who's just did a session on PASA Youth, which is a training program that you give in local communities, and and we've been working on local community risk assessments after a disaster, making sure, even doing an assessment of what potential risks are going forward. And we've been working with the UN system and with the International Federation of the Red Cross on policy indicators, where we were looking at whether we had the indicators that were necessary to identify where tenure needed to be stronger, where housing regulations needed changing, and various other things. So that's really the direction that I'm coming from. In terms of what we've been doing since then is that we've been also engaged in a number of stakeholder platforms, and talking about the global again to the local. We worked on influencing to make sure that tenure was incorporated into the SDGs and housing was incorporated into the Sustainable Development Goals. And now we're working with UN Habitat in particular to promote SDG Goal 11, where we will be working with UNDRR and others. And then from here, there's a stakeholder engagement meeting that's taking place in Geneva, where I go from here, where we're looking to see how we integrate all of these other global agreements, including Sendai and Financing for Development and others, because we don't seem to be talking to each other. We need to be talking more in a more integrated fashion. So we met and are looking at the next logical step for the campaign that we've had, the Solid Ground campaign, which is going to be phasing out early next year. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was say, land tenure has been so important, disaster risk reduction has been so important, what can we do to continue working on this issue? And I think that's one of the reasons why we are really interested in seeing whether we can join the campaign. And it's something that we are looking now to evaluate. But we have so many tools and trainings that we can offer. We have so much experience at the local level, and I want to make sure that we have, to promote that we've been working at the community level, which is really important, that the community is engaged in this process, that there is a participatory process at the community which has some say in what they're going to be facing in a disaster, and that they're trained to be able to face the disasters, since it's going to impact them mostly. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Jane. This is again something which addresses directly the underlying drivers of risk. So if people don't have the tenure of land tenure, or they don't own the houses or the land from which they suffer a disaster, they are displaced, then where do they go? And then if they have tenure of land, they have their houses, then they are able to access finance also. But otherwise, they are left without any sources to support their recovery. So that's why we think that it would be very important to bring the Habitat for Humanity International into the campaign fold also, because advising the local governments on land tenure issues, land use and urban development. Also, it's something which came up in the last discussion, in the last panel which happened in this room, regarding the movement of populations from rural to urban. And that is also a challenge which the cities are facing. I think Gino also referred to it a bit, in the rapid urbanization that is happening. And the pressure that it puts on the cities to deliver the various services, and then maybe the tools and the experience can help, could be something useful for the cities to deal with these issues. So that's the panel that we had today. But now the floor is open. I would specifically like to call on Miss Lorraine Carmiol. She's the Vice Mayor of Santa Ana, Costa Rica, and yeah, and I think her intervention at this point would be very valuable. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe shall I very quickly present maybe why you're here, Laura, for you, and then I pass it to you, or do you want to continue directly? So maybe let me allow to present quickly that Mish is the Vice Mayor of Santa Ana in Costa Rica, and actually UCLG has just launched a collaboration with the Local Government Association of Costa Rica and together with UN Habitat to do exactly, I think, what the Secretary General of ICLEI has asked for, no, or claimed for, to encourage cities to learn from each other on the topics of resilience, on climate change adaptation, mitigation. And we try to do this via a pilot in Santa Ana. And actually the good result is that we already can announce that just the first round of piloting there in Santa Ana has already caused a learning in effect. And we're going to now have a peer learning event in January, where we're already going to include the whole region of the Caribbean and Central America to come to Costa Rica and to learn and to share the experiences based on this first intent in Costa Rica. And I think this is very important because we believe that learning has to happen in a network. We as UCLG, we cannot go everywhere. What we can do, we can encourage our members to learn from each other and to facilitate. And maybe with this framework and this background, I pass to you, so you can explain a little bit from your perspective how this learning event and this learning activities we organize together with your municipality, what kind of impact it has for your municipality maybe, okay?
Thank you. Well, Santa Ana is a very small city. We are like 51 kilometers, so, and the population is 56,000 persons, and we already experiment the climate change. Well, all over the world is the impact, but we, since 10 years ago, since 2007, yes, more than 10 years, we experiment some landslides and impact in the, not in the human being lives, but in their lands and their houses and everything. So since then we work, and we still work, working in the teach the persons to encourage them to view the changes that happen before a risk. Okay, and we are trying to establish some relations, like Rafael calls, to bring to our community. And we know that that experience brings so much empowered to our people to do more things, to be better and to be prepared. We have a local commission of emergency, and we work with the National Commission too, and we already have Sendai in our land or in our community, and we already try to establish in all parts of the local government the perspective of Sendai's purpose and all that risk taken. It's difficult to me to explain all the things that we do, but I think with the help that we are already establishing in our local government, we get some goals that we improve our action and our empowerment in the people of Santa Ana. Well, maybe you can help me a little bit. Tal vez, digamos, decir la transversalización que hemos hecho en toda la parte del gobierno local.
¿Quieres explicar tú en castellano y él traduce?
Okay, perfecto, muchas gracias. I'm explaining in Spanish.
You translate directly,
Yes, because I think it's better that way. Comentaba de que desde el gobierno local hemos trabajado la transversalización de todos los ejes de gestión de riesgo y hemos trabajado también con la comunidad, que ellos hemos hecho talleres con ellos para tener un centro de monitoreo en temas de prevención.
Yeah. So I was trying to explain how within our local government we've we've made an effort to talk about disaster risk reduction as a cross-cutting issue across the departments, and how we have created a monitoring hub in the community.
También tenemos toda la especialización en temas de planeamiento urbano, ya incluidos los temas de gestión de riesgo, así también como en los planes estratégicos municipales.
And we have included disaster risk management as an issue within our territorial planning specialists and our city master plan and city strategy.
Y los resultados que hemos obtenido han sido realmente provechosos porque tenemos ya las personas capacitadas, tenemos el sistema de monitoreo en pleno funcionamiento, e incluso hacemos simulacros 2 veces al año para tener, digamos, la gestión de riesgos y la preparación adecuada para nuestra población.
And we have had, we feel that we've been very successful in these issues, setting up the monitoring, and also like we organize twice a year, how do you call this? Drills to see that all of the different departments are ready and are prepared for disasters, and the population as well.
Y este último ejercicio o el plan piloto que estamos iniciando, para nosotros cierra el círculo de lo que hemos venido trabajando a nivel local con expertos que nos van a permitir tener una preparación adecuada y principalmente las herramientas que nos permitan poder ser exitosos a la hora de enfrentar un riesgo, porque sabemos que no lo podemos evitar.
And we feel that this pilot plan that we are now implementing kind of closes the loop that we've been working on to work with the local population and now with some experts from outside to make sure that we are properly prepared and have the tools to finish this cycle within the local government.
Así que bueno, muy agradecida nada más. At least I want to thank you all, and I know that we are in the right track to do the goals.
Thank you very much. So very inspiring to hear directly from a city what work they have been doing and supported by key partners. Yeah, thank you. So now the floor is open. So any questions or comments that you want to make directly, you can make, or if you have any question to the speakers, yes. And kindly just introduce yourself also.
Okay.
First here, then there. Yeah.
Okay.
Before.
Thank you so much. I'm Helmi from Asia Pacific section of UCLG, and I I took some notes regarding the presentation before, and it is, yeah, it is indeed that the integration between climate change and DRR is very important. Because of UCLG ASPAC, Asia Pacific region is very prone to disaster. And we are working, we have like more than 170 something cities as a direct member. And until now, we only reach maximum 60 cities only in the regions. So basically we only do, we help them only in advocacy instead of you know, like the implementation and this kind of that city mostly are expecting. Like we want to help them directly. You know, when we have already advocate cities, so we expect more than that. So if I know that the MCR campaigns have been doing like very well and reach like more than 1,000 cities, I think, in Asia itself. But several cities that that I know also, they are quite not active. And my question is whether the UNDRR as the coordinator body of the UN has like you know, like have a strategy or to communicate with the national level, because of when we have when we give already give everything to the city, and of course we will not just you know like help them until the implementation or something. It should be directly under the national levels, national government's responsibility. Instead of because maybe we can help in several cities that only for the pilot, like dealing and we can also integrate as a real assistance or real support. For example, like we help cities in Indonesia how they to develop their existing public spaces. And dealing with the resiliency and everything, and also in Nepal, in Malaysia as well. Like because of every country they have and every city they have their own risk and hazard types. So these kind of things that I want to know more.
Oh, it's a very valid point, and that's what we are proposing also in the, if you see there also that we are saying about the national to local link, because it may not work in every country, so we have to,
Yes.
we will not have a you know, one size fits all approach, but it will be, there will be this approaching the national government so that they can scale up in the country with all the local governments and also provide the required support from the national level to the local, which is very important and which is a
Actually,
key
I
gap
have
area.
two questions, Sanjaya.
sorry.
The first one is for I think for ICLEI. We have a good relation with the regional section of ICLEI in Asia Pacific as well. But the thing is, I think we have to work very close since this issue is not only about the DRR, but and ICLEI is an expert for the environment things, you know, like climate change and adaptation. And then now in most of the cities in Asia, they are already developing the climate actions, local climate action plan. And and some city they might confuse, you know, might be confused about why I already developed this separate document and the integration kind of. Maybe you can share one city or other city in Asia Pacific that can be as a good sample, like both for climate, you know, like disaster triggered by the climate change, or whether really triggered by the natural disaster, like something like that. Thank you.
So,
surely, I mean, when we work with the cities that are a member of ICLEI, and as you very well know, we are very much working on the ground. So we try to fundraise funds to actually then develop the resilience plans and the climate mitigation plans with the cities. That's expertise that we have in our organization and within the various offices, including in Southeast Asia or in South Asia. And that's a work that we have been doing now many years. Now, when it comes to the issue of combining everything into one plan, the baseline is first of all to look into what do you want to combine, right? So as I said in the beginning, every city, every urban area is very specific. So you would need to look into what are the needs of that particular urban area, and is your entry door rather the mitigation part, the disaster part, or the climate adaptation, or even DRR. So these are discussions and decisions you have to make from the very beginning, and then from there you then will try to integrate all of the other parts into that plan, so that you avoid of having 5 different plans at the end of the day, which is of course a duplication of efforts. Now, that is in theory. What you then need also is, of course, that the various departments in a city, and therefore the leadership of that city is extremely important, because the leadership has to bring together those various departments to ensure that we then are all behind one particular path. And I'm saying this not only for South Asia or Southeast Asia. This is exactly in the city where I have our headquarters, in the city of Bonn. And the city of Bonn has now announced a climate emergency by the city council. Now, what does it mean? What does it mean? How do you do climate emergency in the city of Bonn, for example, right? So we are in a total different aspect than maybe a comparable city in its size in your region, but the elements of looking to that is totally different. So when I asked the mayor, what is it, what you're going to do, what does it mean, climate emergency for you in Bonn? It means here, very particularly, to say we're going to look into every single euro that we are spending on our procurement of services and goods, for example, to look into how is that euro actually contributing to climate change or not. It means ultimately, in a very concrete way, that the city of Bonn is now looking into changing all of their plastic bags that they use for waste in their schools and hospitals, etc., into more recyclable or environment-friendly bags. A cost of, if just in the operations of the city administration, a cost of more than 300,000 euros per year. Now, that is what it means, climate emergency, if you track it down up to the last moment, and then the city council say, okay, can we provide that money for that particular climate emergency action now? So what my point here is, just by means of that example, is to say this is what we have to do when it comes to disaster risk prevention. We have to look into, and these are very, very serious. I mean, my example in Bonn is, is a financial issue maybe, and an environmental issue. But in the case of disaster prevention of risks, we are talking about social elements. I mean, can you, what do you do when there is informality, when people are migrating onto the bridges and over 2 months, 3 months time, there are 1,000 people that have come and lived there, when we know this is a very vulnerable place. So how do you deal with that? In considering the right of the city and the right of housing, the right of being somewhere at the one hand, at the other hand then vulnerability in terms of climate impacts, for example, or disaster impacts. So I'm just saying this, I'm giving these examples to give you a sentiment of the weighting that has to come in. It's ultimately, of course, a political decision from the leadership in a city. But what we try to do is to bring at least a light and to shine that light on the various aspects. And from there, see then, okay, how can you make your decision making accordingly, or having full information maybe of those various elements. And that's what I said at the beginning. I think when it comes to disasters, we do not have enough information at the local level. We have information and data that is nationally available, but also they're certainly not sufficient. Some of it is regional. Some of them are models that are being scientifically approached and then broken down. But it's far away from what we need to have in order to make sound decisions. And that is really a problem, that we need to actually engage our cities, and many of the cities have universities, have institutions of knowledge base that we can bring in. And that is something that when we talk about resourcing, it's not only about the financing part, but it's also about connecting this and bring those kind of resources back to the leadership. And it's astonishing to see why in a city where there is a good university or various educational institutions, why there is not that exchange taking place with the leadership or the administration. And so what can we do to raise that as well? So long story short, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but my point is that I'm not going to tell you which city is now doing well or not well. I mean, that is not a good thing to do. But I just wanted to highlight the differentiation that is necessary and shining a light on the various problematics, and then from there trying to get an integrated solution on at least some of those as much as possible. And then, start and take it off. And then in 5 years' time, you will need to add on. And this is a process. This is not something that's going to stop. It's an ongoing process. The more as we are going to move towards larger urban areas in the future.
Thank you very much. I think very important point, and I've noted this down. It's very inspiring also. There was one question, just a quick one, because we now don't have time. We are actually over time. So just a quick one. Please introduce yourself and then.
Thanks, Chair. With climate change, there are lots of questions. Yeah, my name is Tebo Homatlu from Salaga, South African Local Government Association. Thanks for South African Local Government Association. We are also working with Italy. Thanks for good presentations on the topic. But I had key issues that I wanted to ask, especially on the Grand Partnership. That is there any plan to serve those teams using research and development, innovation and technology to focus more on that partnership issue? What is the strategy for the second one on local government association? Because I just hear that there's no data that we can provide for the plans. And lastly is that what I've picked up in most of the municipalities, because we are working on a certain project that is funded by the government of Canada, is that there's a lack of planning for long-term recovery for our municipalities. Immediately after disaster, and also UN tried to assist one of the municipalities, the same eThekwini, they had a disaster in April, but still even today we don't have that recovery plan, and Port St. John's on the other side. Is there any way where we can start looking at those so that we assist municipalities not to use consultant, local government or nation, not to use consultant, but to develop a capacity within the municipalities to do it on themselves, because they are the custodian of these issues, so that we are able to make a meaningful input, not to get somebody to do a document to give it to you, but you are the part of the process through that development. Lastly, on the incentive for city-to-city learning, how about we also, on the resilience hubs, we include school-to-school learning program? Because I'll give an example. My daughter the other time was telling me, please don't throw these things, don't use the cell phones. So I've learned to say, look, my conscience tells me that these are the people that can teach us more better on issues of environment issues, even if we know, but we ignore, because as adults we think we know, but the school-to-school programs can also strengthen the issue of environment, because those are the basics that we think we know, but the learners, the young ones can teach us much better everywhere we go. Thanks very much.
No, I think that's a very a good point about the of the school and the youth. That was also okay, but we're out of time. Yeah, but regarding the scaling up through the networks of local associations, one of the key issues there is to build the capacity of the local associations first. So, and that's something which, you know, the UCLG is already thinking about. And in fact, the ASPAC, the Asia Pacific office of UCLG has been pilot testing some capacity development work to build the capacity of the local association networks, but also at the global level, UCLG is looking at developing a program which can be used to first build the capacity of the local associations so that the local associations have the required information. Again, coming back to Gino's point, they have the required information with which they can then use to educate the political leaders and also to build their awareness so that they can make the right decisions. So I think that's I think this reinforces the point that Rafael is already working on, and and UCLG is working on, and Helmi also to build this. So that is the modality, to first build the capacity of the local associations, and also to avoid these consultants coming in and out, flying in and out and all, to encourage more the learning between the cities. So a city which has done something can share that experience with other cities, and maybe even not only sharing through a platform, but city-to-city exchange. So officials of one city visiting the other city and studying in depth how it was done, and you know, learning from that experience, rather than not just in a global summit, but going to the city and learning how it was done. So those are the ideas behind this. I think we are totally out of time, so I have to close this session. Of course, offline we can continue the discussion, but thank you very much. I think we competed fairly well with the voting, in the sense that we had a very interesting discussion here. And I want to thank the panelists and thank all of you for your contribution. So wish you all the best. Thank you.